The king came to Winterfell with a storm and a laugh, and the yard filled with the shine of southern steel. The banners of the stag cracked in the cold wind. The smell of horse and damp wool rolled across the stones. Jon watched from the shade of the first keep, ghost silent at his side like a pale piece of winter dragged into the world. Men's voices were everywhere. Unfamiliar cadences, tinny from helm plates, coarse with the comfort of roads and wine. He pressed his knuckles into the well-worn groove of a merlin, tasting iron where he'd scraped skin there as a boy learning to climb. The king dismounted, and the yard twisted around him as if all men were just threads that his stride pulled tight. Robert Baratheon remembered Winterfell as a hall of boys, strong backs, and a woman's eyes in the dark between torches. He stood now heavier than the songs, much heavier than the memory of the man who once leaped battlements, and he smiled like a man smiles at a friend long since buried. He brought winter no apology. He brought it feasts and hunting talk and careless gifts, as if warmth could be coaxed from the north by coin alone. Jon did not expect the king's eye to find him, not amid the lords and liveries, amid the clatter of Ser Boros Blunt and Ser Meryn Trant and the gold thread cloak of the Kingsguard commander, the old white knight with a face that had been carved in a younger age and polished with duty. Yet Robert's gaze slid from Ned Stark to the children ranked beside him, lingered on Robb, danced past Sansa, Arya already shifting her weight like a yearling colt, past Bran in his small proud eagerness, to the bastard who stood back and to the pale direwolf at his heel. 7 hells, Robert muttered, and an expression moved through his face that was not the king's expression. It was the look of a man who has heard a note in a familiar song that shouldn't exist. Later, when the greetings were spent and the hall roared with eating, Jon ate and drank quietly, Ghost's head on his boot. Words like betrothal and hand came and went like swallows skimming a pond. Jon had learned to sit in rooms where he did not belong. He listened to laughter that didn't need him, to schemes that would be strung across maps he'd never touch. He measured faces for interest and found them concerning themselves with other constellations. Southern lords with their gold filigree and their restless eyes, the queen hard and bright as a knife that had known no whetstone. The king laughed as if laughter could lance pain from the ribs. Ned Stark said little, and Jon shaded his own quiet under that larger reticence, feeling the iron of it, the calm of it. He was content to be unnoticed. Only he was not unnoticed. Twice, the king's eyes found him across the hall, and twice Jon looked away first. He felt the weight of the queen's gaze, once, long enough to know that she had counted him, placed him, filed him with a flicker of contempt and a calculation that had nothing to do with a boy from the north. In the yard the next morning, Jon rose early to spar with Robb. The air was still blue with cold, breath visible, the world grave calm beneath a lid of cloud. Iron rang from wooden swords, their footwork traced patterns pressed into the frost. Ghost moved as a second shadow. It was then the king came, bare-furred cloak thrown on as if he'd slept in it. His cheeks were flushed. A few steps behind, a green-cloaked man Jon learned later to be Renly walked with an amused tilt to his mouth, and the Kingsguard knight with the white hair and the clear eyes followed cool as morning. The king watched as Jon and Robb closed and separated, closed again. When the bout ended and both boys were panting, Robert said, "Another round. You?" The gloved hand lifted at Jon. "With the direwolf. I've never watched a Stark fight with a ghost at his foot." "He doesn't bite," Jon said, because Catelyn Stark was near the arch with Septa Mordane and Lady Sansa, and Jon felt their glance as a pressure between his shoulders. "A shame," Robert said, friendly vastness in his chest. "I could name men I'd have him bite." They squared up. Jon felt the crumbling excitement he always felt before a bout when the world narrowed to wood, breath, angles. Robb feinted, swung, and Jon parried, the wood clacking. They moved quick, a shade too eager, and it was Jon who pressed this time, stepping through Robb's guard the way Ser Roderick had drilled, catching him high at the shoulder. The smack echoed off stone. Robb smiled through the sting. They were brothers there, and planing each other down with each cut. When it ended, the king said, "Good, good. The wolf doesn't flinch. The boy barely does. What's your name?" Jon left out a breath. Jon Snow. Snow. The king's eyes turned slightly to Ned, whose face closed an inch. A bastard of Winterfell, then? Yes, your grace. He could feel the queen's attention from across the yard, cold as the wind. The king looked again, noted the dark hair and gray eyes, the economy of movement. The two still carriage boys learn in houses where they must be less to be allowed to be. Then Robert said casually, the words falling as if they had been obvious in his mouth for days rather than forming there in that moment. I'll take him. The yard hushed. Even the horses shifted less. Ned said, Your Grace, as my page, Robert said, voice booming to sweep aside the trestles of custom. The king should have a page with a cool head and quick hands, and I am tired of boys who spill wine and stammer. You, he jabbed a finger at Jon. You can ride. Yes, Jon said. His heart was louder than the king. Good. You'll ride with us to King's Landing. You'll learn the ways of the court and the road. You'll pour my wine and fetch my spear and keep my hounds from their own stupidity. He grinned broadly. And if the queen has thoughts on the matter, she may sew them into a pillow and sleep on it. Cersei's smile did not reach her eyes. I am always glad to see my lord husband surrounded by Northmen, she said in a voice like glassware. They are so loyal. Ned Stark's eyes were on Jon, steady as winter sky. There were words there, question, warning, something old and not yet entirely defined. Jon held the gaze, searching for permission, for the boundary he had never stepped beyond. Ned's mouth thinned, but he nodded once, the smallest motion, like a man acknowledging a river he cannot dam. Go clean up, Robert boomed. Your first task as page is to eat better than you look. If joy was a door Jon had locked against himself, it shifted in its hinges. He bowed and left, aware of the queen watching, of Sansa's little gasp and Arya's open grin. He did not look at Catelyn Stark. He would not hold that gaze and receive what lay in it. He was halfway to the armory when the world broke. The tower in the inner ward caught sunlight a moment like a flint flashing. Bran was there because he always climbed, because to him stone was branch and wall was air. Jon did not see the push. He saw only motion, wrong in the corner of vision, a small shape cut loose from its rightful place. He ran before sound arrived. Ghost ran ahead, a white streak across the yard. Jon had time to think nothing but no, and then Bran met the earth with a sickening thud and a silence that killed both thought and prayer. The rest became noise. Shouting men, women's voices cut thin, Robb's face gone white and raw, Catelyn's wail. Jon knelt at a distance the way a man kneels at the edge of a ravine where the ground is not to be trusted. Ghost pressed forward, whining low and constant. When Jon reached out, Robb's hand found his wrist and gripped hard enough to hurt, and neither of them told the other to be strong. They did not pretend to be anything at all. The days that followed dropped their hours like stones into a well. Catelyn would not leave Bran's bedside and would not have Jon there. Jon slept in the armory with the smell of oiled leather and ghosted steel. In a world where grief often brings people together, his grief walked alone because that was the shape his life had always taken. He drifted through shadows of news. The king drinking late, the queen in the godswood with her brothers' faces like weather. The rumor of what had happened was a blind thing in the hall, bumping its cup from table to table. Jon went to the godswood the night before departure for the south. Ned stood beneath the heart tree, the red sap hardened like old tears. The weirwood's carved face regarded winter without blinking. Ned's sword lay across his knees. Ghost hung back at the tree line, white on white, watching. Father, Jon said, tasting the word. He had not called him that often. He called him Lord sometimes and nothing more most days. But tonight he said father and let the truth own him. Ned turned with the gravity of a man who had carried many lives through many winters. Jon, is it true? I ride with the king. It is true. Lady Stark, Catelyn's grief is a mountain, Ned said quietly. She cannot see beyond its edge. You are not the cause of it. Jon swallowed. I thought to go to the wall with Uncle Benjen. The thought had been so sharp once, so bright it could cut. I told myself I wanted it more than anything, that it would make me something I could be proud of. The wall would have made you something, Ned murmured. It would not have made you everything you are. The wind hissed through the leaves like old men turning pages. Jon stared at the face carved into heartwood, at the tears dried, at the features smoothed by storm. Did you know I could not stay? Was that the plan all along? Plans are a net, Ned said. Life is the ocean. Sometimes it tears through and leaves you wet and wiser. Sometimes it drags you to the bottom. He looked at the sword on his knees. When I was a boy, I followed my brother into a fight that was not ours to begin, and it took everything I loved to end it. I am not good at plans that require soft words, Jon. I am good at standing when I said I would stand. Jon stepped closer. He had so many questions rolled into one question he was not allowed to ask. He wanted to speak Lyanna's name and swallow it in the same breath. He wanted the story of his own life told to him in a way that made it a map. Ned's face made it clear there would be no maps. The North did not give maps. It gave you a direction and a winter and asked if you could survive both. Serve the king as if you were my son, Ned said simply. Keep your eyes open. Learn. Choose your friends as carefully as you would choose your ground. Do not forget the North when the South flatters you. Will you? Jon asked and stopped, because he had almost said love me, and that was past some border he rarely crossed. He changed direction clumsily. Will you send word of Bran? I will, and I will bring him back to you. Jon nodded. He thought about kneeling to the tree to ask a god that might be only wood for mercy. Instead, he shifted the sword on Ned's knees and took the weight of it for a moment. A foolish boy's desire to feel that famous iron, and Ned let him. It was heavier than it looked. It was always heavier. He left the godswood with breath smoking in the air and ghosts trotting after. He did not speak to Catelyn. He didn't think he would survive the things he might say or the things she might say in return. He said farewell to Robb in a hallway with a rough hug at the end, and to Arya by having her slip her small hand into his and not let go until Ghost pushed his nose between them like an anxious nurse. The morning they rode, the sky was white and pitiless. Jon followed the king because he had been told to, and also because some old emptiness in him looked toward the road as if it were a story that might end differently than all the other stories had. On the King's Road, the world became a rhythm. Hooves, steel clink, the creak of the Queen's enormous wheelhouse that moved like a stubborn beast 2 steps behind every command given it. As page, Jon rode close to Robert's stirrup. He learned where the king liked his cup and when he wanted it without asking. During the worst stretch of mud, after a tale about the trident, when the Queen's voice cut the air clean. He learned to read the moods of the White Cloaks, Barristan's quiet honor, a winter lake that could carry a host or swallow a child, Meryn's sullen appetite, Boros's petty, bruised pride. He learned the hound's silence and glancing pity as a man wears scars, not for others to interpret, laid there by older fire. He learned the rhythms of Sandor Clegane's terrible patience with foolishness and his brief sweetness with Arya when he taught her how to sit a horse and be harder than her fear. Mind your hands, Sandor told Jon once as Jon reached to steady Arya's pony on a rutted slope. She's a wolf. She'd climb the bloody moon. She falls sometimes, Jon said. So do wolves, Sandor said. They get up. Jon did not try to befriend the hound. He tried not to stand where Joffrey would be forced to notice him, but he failed at that. The prince noticed him with a prince's contempt, lazy and flickering, reviving itself like a fire when stoked by the queen. Sansa watched from that careful distance. Girls learn. Admiration arranged in its safe box where it could sit beside unexamined beliefs. Arya moved in arcs around everything and everyone, happiest when she was on a verge about to be crossed. It happened on a hot afternoon when the day had dragged the sun like a siege tower across the vault of sky. They came upon the butcher's boy in a clearing, a skinny lad with straw in his hair, the small-shouldered jail of his life clinging to him even out on the road. Arya was there before anyone else saw, a stick in her grip, laughter in her mouth that was not gentle but not cruel either. The boy, Micah, laughed with her, awkward and bright as if he'd never learned how to laugh right. Joffrey rode in with the hound pacing his horse like a kept wolf. He looked at Arya and the butcher's boy the way a cat looks at a beetle on a tablecloth. Words were spoken. Jon was close enough to catch the tone even if he missed the first barb. Joffrey's lazy cruelty, Arya's refusal, Micah's fear sharpening into panic. It turned quick, as any child's game turns when someone with power chooses to make it about power. Steel came out where it had no place being. Jon saw the angle of the prince's wrist and the fear in the butcher's boy's eyes, and his horse was moving before thought could shout after it. He put his mare between Joffrey's blade and the bigger hurt that would follow, and he heard the king's distant bark of laughter die. "Your Highness," Jon said, and his voice was level with an effort that cost. "It's play. A peasant's play," Joffrey said through sweat and vanity. "I'll teach him a better game." "You'll teach him to bleed," Jon said, and brought his wooden practice sword up gently, casually, almost as if he was adjusting his glove. The cheap trick of the movement hid the force behind it. When Joffrey flicked his hand to strike Micah's cheek as a lesson, Jon's wood was there, hard, knocking the blade aside with a crack. Joffrey yelped more from surprise than anything else. In the next breath, everything happened at once. Nymeria came from nowhere with a howl, a streak of gray. Joffrey flailed. Arya shouted, half in fear, half in triumph. Jon felt Ghost slam to the ground beside him, low and ready, the sound he made small and ugly. "Enough," Robert bellowed, and the bellow had the weight of a spear in it. The clearing froze, and then when the freeze broke, it broke in jagged pieces. The queen's wheelhouse ground to a halt at the track's edge, and Cersei descended with her hawk mask stilling her face. Her eyes took in the scene, the prince pale with outrage, the bastard between him and the world, the butcher's boy with his hands up, Arya's hair loose and her stick in the dirt, the two direwolves drawn in like knives. "Your son was playing at knighthood," Jon said to the king, not looking at the queen. He kept it simple. Men who wanted to be persuaded liked the thing they were being persuaded to own to be small and obvious. "He raised steel on common refuse," Cersei said, ignoring him. "And a beast was set on him. I will have their heads. All of them." Arya drew breath as if to say yes, and Nymeria's lip lifted. Ghost's body burned against Jon's calf. His silence was aflame. Robert looked at the boy. He looked at Joffrey, his son. He swung between the two as if one were a memory and the other a future he refused to inspect too closely. "Your Grace," Jon said softly into the space where indecision lived. "It was play that went wrong. No one is maimed. There's no cause to take lives." His eyes did not flick to the queen. He kept them on Robert, on the way the king's mouth twisted when Cersei spoke, on the way his huge shoulders remembered a time when he could fight his way out of every puzzle. "My hand," Joffrey said, showing a red welt as if it were a sword through the gut. "He struck me. The cur. The cur saved your cheek," Sandor said under his breath. "You'd have taken your own eye with how you were holding that blade." Cersei's glance scythed. "Sandor, your grace," Barristan said gently to Robert, voice like a door closing softly. "There has been foolishness enough." "Foolishness?" Cersei repeated, the word corroding in her mouth. "Two wolves on a prince. It is treason. It is." "Enough," Robert said again, and this time it cracked. "I will not hear the word treason attached to children." His eyes rested on Jon a fraction longer than they should have. "The wolves go under guard," he said, grasping for a compromise even as he hated it. "The boy, what is your name?" "Micah," Jon prompted. "Micah. He runs at the king's pace until supper, and he eats at the king's table tonight," Robert said, making a choice that surprised even himself, derision for weakness turning into an odd magnanimity in his hands. "He will learn that nobles are ill company. Arya, you will spend the evening with Septa Mordain and your needlework." Arya opened her mouth to argue and looked at Jon, and something in his face sent it closed. "And my son," Robert added, "will apologize to his cousin by courtesy for drawing steel where laughter would have done." Joffrey's mouth fell open. The queen's face became a thing made of gold leaf and rigid will. "Your Grace," Cersei began. Robert rubbed his temple. "Say the words." Joffrey said them as if they were a bitter fruit that stuck to his tongue. No one was fooled by the shape of them. They rode on with a silence that creaked. Cersei's rage wore a mask because it had to. The hound glanced back once at Jon, measuring. Barristan gave Jon a small, opaque nod that a man might give another when both had done a hard thing in public. That night, Jon found Micah in the edge of the camp, holding a slab of pork like a talisman, eyes astonished from the king's table. The butcher's boy looked at Jon as if he'd walked with gods. "You can't stay," Jon told him in a tone that was more brother than lord. "Tomorrow, when there's bustle, you go. Cut away from the road. Find a cart north. Tell the driver you can gut pigs twice as fast as any man. Speak less than is easy. Listen more. The queen will not forget today." "She's a queen," Micah said, as if that were a word too big. "She's a lion," Jon said. "Lions do not forget their meat." In the dark beyond, Ghost and Nymeria moved like bad dreams made flesh. Jon spent an hour persuading Arya to do what was needed with her wolf. Tears, stubbornness, a grief that reminded him of the godswood's face. Together they slapped the she-wolf's flank and shouted until Nymeria vanished into the black. And the hole her departure tore in Arya's breathing was a thing Jon felt against his palm, as if he were holding an empty bowl. The next day passed without a hunt for a butcher's boy or a she-wolf because Robert had said enough. But Cersei's eyes tasted the air as if it might hold another chance, and Jon learned the exact pitch of the queen's voice when she spoke to her cousin Lancel later, the squire with hair the color of summer wheat and a mouth that tried to be clever and became uncertain. "Keep his cup full," she told Lancel. "The king is a better man drunk. Men forgive more quickly when they are drunk, and they remember less." Jon heard because he had been sent back for a cloth. He did not mean to eavesdrop. The words were simply there, low but crisp, between the queen, Lancel, and the bright afternoon. He didn't move, and neither did Ghost, who had learned in the yard that sometimes no movement was the only kind of move. On the third day they came upon a game trail, and the king's mood, always mercurial, slid into that boyish eagerness that made him briefly the man songs remembered. "Boar," Robert grinned, chin wet with wine. "I smell it in the dung and the earth. Come, page, fetch my spear. I'll show you why I am king." Jon took the spear. He noticed the skin of strong wine on Lancel's saddle, the way Lancel's hand hovered as if near a sin. He knew the way he knew when a horse was about to shy. He could see the boar hunt as a series of choices he could not control, and he felt something crack in him, small and decisive, like a frost-sheathed twig under a boot. When he handed up the spear, he handed up a different wineskin than the one Lancel offered. He did it easily, with a motion so practiced it was invisible. He had already switched the skins, his fingers finding the scuffed leather he had marked with a pinprick near the neck as they crept through camp before dawn. He met Lancel's eyes while he did it, and Lancel blinked, little affronted, little relieved without knowing why, perhaps only glad to be spared the weight of doing what he had been commanded to do. The queen's will had sharp teeth. The king's page had learned that sometimes you distract sharp teeth with a bone tossed left. The hunt slid into motion. Jon rode at Robert's heel. Sandor was there, and Barristan, the old lion riding light. The hounds found scent and ran with a cacophony that turned the world into noise. The party strung out. Boar signs grew thick in the brush, fresh churnings, marks on trees like slashes in skin. Jon felt the shape of danger ahead like cold rain in his bones. When the boar came smashing out of the undergrowth, it came like a shipwreck, all weight and blind insistence. Robert bellowed the way he'd bellowed in the yard. Pleasure in it, excitement, and the spear went clean and true because the man's hand was not too heavy with wine. It caught the boar behind the shoulder, but not deep enough to drop it. The beast screamed around iron. Then it came for the king. Ghost was moving before Jon, a white missile, hitting the boar's snout with the full of his body. The goring tusk ripped the air where the king's thigh had been a heartbeat earlier. Sandor's big courser slid sideways. The hound swore through clenched teeth and slashed at the boar's eye with a hunting sword. Barristan's mount danced, the old man's face suddenly as young as it had been at the trident, not with beauty but with purpose. Robert pivoted, shoving the spear in with both hands, putting his huge shoulders behind it. The boar shuddered and went down, legs jerking. The clearing echoed with breath and the small sounds of triumph no one would admit to. Robert's hand went to his side. Came away bloody, not a gore-deep wound. More a brutal plow across muscle that would leave a scar and a story. But for a moment Jon could see what it would have been if wine had dulled the hand, if the spear had been an inch slower, if Ghost had been a heartbeat later. He tasted the shape of the world that did not happen and swallowed. "You see," Robert gasped, laughing through pain. "You see, boy? There's no better song than this." Jon took the spear as the king leaned. He bound the wound with a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt while Sandor grunted and did the same from a cleaner roll. Barristan dismounted and set a hand to the king's shoulder, the touch of a father who had never married. "You'll live," the old knight said. "Of course I'll live," Robert snapped, pleased and angry in the same breath. "It takes more than a pig to steal my place from me. Come, let's get the beast on a travois. The queen will want to see I bleed red like any other man." They rode back slow, the king's blood drying brown on his tunic. Jon carried the spear and thought about how close the world had been to becoming another world entirely. The wind tasted of iron and late summer and the beginning of consequences. Cersei met them outside camp, calculating swiftly when she saw the wound was not mortal, experiencing a private collapse that did not touch her face. Lancel blanched when Jon's gaze passed over him. Jon let the look be a small weight enough to bruise. In the king's tent, Pycelle peered and tutayed and did the work of keeping men alive that is a physician's proper magic. Robert drank water, then wine. When he had been bound and made comfortable, when the servants had been dismissed and the white knights had stepped aside outside the tent flap, Jon saw his chance harden in the air like frost. He looked at Ned Stark, who was there, silent through the injury, his face set against unmeasured risk. Ned turned his head a fraction, the same fraction of a nod from the godswood, and Jon took it. "Your Grace," Jon said, voice low but steady. "There is something I should tell you." "Not now, boy," Robert said, irritated by pain he would not admit. "It is about the queen," Jon said. Robert's head came around. "Careful," Ned said. "He is careful." He was not looking at Robert. He was looking at Jon, weighing what he had chosen to do. Jon told what he had heard, the instruction to a squire, the shape of an intent. He did not embroider. He did not accuse. He let the simple facts lie on the board between them like bleak pieces of carved stone that could be arranged only one way without making the men placing them into liars. "So," Robert said after a long feeling of silence, "so I would have died for a pig and a cup, and my wife's cousin would have comforted her." His laugh was a crack in the air. "Seven hells, I am tired of being a jape." Ned said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, it was like lowering a sword point. "There is more, Robert," he said. "Not about the wine, about your children." Robert looked at him as if he were staring across a battlefield and realizing too late that the banners were wrong. "What nonsense is this?" Ned set a book on the table, the heavy volume he had requested and read in the last 2 days. Lineages and histories, hair and seed, the long tedious gossip of blood that tells truths men would rather keep as fables. He opened it to pages thumbed soft and showed Robert names. Then he spoke quietly about Gendry the armorer's apprentice with his black hair and handsome certainty, about a dozen babes in King's Landing with the same look, all born of a king who had never met a woman he couldn't make laugh if he tried. He spoke about Joffrey's gold hair, and Myrcella's and Sweet Tommen's, about the way the lion acquires every room it lives in if the stag does not kick. "Say it," Robert whispered. The bandage pulled red as he breathed. "They are not your children," Ned said, and the truth unknotted its cords and lay there between them, ugly and undeniable. Robert's face became a ruin in an instant, the kind of ruin men make when they finally stop holding the walls up out of habit. He stared at the tent's ceiling until the cloth was stars. Then he brought a hand down hard on the table and the wine shivered in its cup. "Barristan," he called hoarsely. The White Knight appeared as if he had been waiting to be required. "Send for Ser Ares and Ser Marin. And Sandor, keep your hand on your sword. If anyone wearing a lion looks crosswise at this tent, put them on the ground." "Your Grace," Barristan said, and the honor in his voice was no comfort because honor had teeth on a day like this. Ned said, "Robert, we must be. We will be quick," Robert snarled. "Quick and clean. I am done with years of slow rot and whispered poisons. Summon my council. Bring the queen. No, do not bring the queen. Bring the Hands Guard. Bring Janos Slint and his gold cloaks. I want the throne room, and I want it now. While I am so angry, I might be wise." Jon stood very still because he felt what he had started move in the air like a hawk stooping. He had imagined telling the truth would be like tipping water from a cup. Simple. He had not imagined that it would be like cutting a rope and watching a weight fall and wondering who stood beneath it. He had not imagined the bruise of pity he felt for even the people he could not afford to pity. The throne room smelled always of iron and old sunlight. Robert walked with a limp and did not allow it to be called a limp. He mounted the steps to the Iron Throne and sat with his hand pressed to his side as if he were holding himself together with palm alone. His face was set in the grim, slashing lines of the man who had hammered Rhaegar Targaryen to death in a river. Whatever softness wine had given him was boiled off. Cersei came with her children. Jaime walked with them and did not bother to put a look on his face that would fool anyone. Littlefinger drifted like smoke. Varys hovered like a lover of rooms more than men. Pycelle arrived panting. Renly was there already, mouth-tight. The gold cloaks filled the hall in gleaming order, Janos Slint watchful and slick. Ned stood to one side, the northern stone in a southern room. Jon stood behind Robert's right where a page should stand, invisible. Ghost slipped into the shadow between two pillars like a piece of winter that the kings forged of knives could not cut. "Your Grace," Cersei said with a smile, sketching a shape with her head that looked like humility at a distance and mockery near at hand. "I hear you killed a boar. I hope you didn't drink its health afterward." Robert's expression did not move. "I did not," he said. He looked at Jaime as if he were measuring a coat that might one day be torn from him. He looked at Joffrey, who gazed at him as if he had never truly seen a man he called father. "We are family," Robert said, voice big and steady. "So we will speak like family." "Family," Jaime drawled. "Always a warm word." "You have cuckolded me," Robert said. He said it softly, as if softness made it a kind of mercy. Silence hit like a thrown shield. Cersei's face did not break. Changed. The smile peeled back. "You are drunk." "Not today," Robert said. "You wound me," Cersei said, hand to her breast without meaning it. "You wound your son." She reached for Joffrey's hand and found it already half with its sword on its own. The boy's eyes were fever big. "My son," Robert said, and there was such pain in the two words that even Jon flinched from it. "I have 100 bastards in this city who look more like me than he does. Did you think me blind? Did you think me so far drowned in wine that I could not count colors? They are not mine. None of them." Joffrey made a sound and stepped forward. "You will not speak of my mother," he began. Sandor's hand was on the boy's shoulder in a single ghosting motion, and the boy went still because instinct survived where judgment flailed. "You will be quiet," Robert said to the prince without heat for the first time in a long time. He looked at Barristan. "Arrest the queen." The hall did not breathe. Cersei's gaze flicked to Jaime, and in that flicker an entire conversation occurred. The weighing of blades and men, the calculation of distance and heartbeat, the knowledge of how much blood it would take to change the room's shape. Jaime's hand went to his sword because Jaime's hand was not a hand that learned to stop moving when told to by men he did not respect. "Don't," Barristan said to him in a voice so flat it was nearly pity. "Do not make a war of this room, Kingslayer." "Bold counsel," Jaime smiled thinly, "from a man who would see a queen dragged like a thief." Ned stepped forward into that gap. He looked at Jaime for a long count of 3. "Do you remember?" he asked, his tone almost conversational. "The sound of a mad king burning?" Jaime's smile died. He released the idea he had been holding. The room found breath again and used it in different ways. Varys exhaled. Littlefinger tilted his head to catch new currents. Janos Slynt moved men with his eyes. Cersei said, "You will not keep me. The Rock will hear of this before your wound stops bleeding." "The Rock will hear," Robert said. "It will hear that I have disowned your children and named my brother Stannis heir according to law. It will hear that its lioness is kept kindly in a high tower until she learns the difference between a marriage and a masquerade. It will hear that the realm is ruled by its king, not by fear of gold." Cersei laughed then, pure derision. "Your realm is ruled by whoever empties your cup." "Then consider my cup emptied," Robert said, and for a terrible moment there was a man in his words, a man nearly recovered from himself. "Janos." "My lord," Janos Slynt said, oily with readiness. "You will take 20 good men," Robert said. "You will escort the queen and her children to their chambers. They are to be prisoners there, but not humiliated. Do not lay a hand on the princess. Do not harm the boy. If any man in red or gold draws steel, kill him. Barristan, any man in white who moves without my word will find himself relieved of his cloak." Barristan bowed once, the single gesture of a man whose soul had just been weighed and not found wanting. "And what of me?" Jaime asked, delightful as a knife, testing where the flesh yielded. "You," Robert said with strange gentleness. "You will stay in your room tonight and consider what you owe your vows. You will walk in the yard tomorrow and go where Ser Barristan tells you to go. If your father marches, you will send him a letter telling him the cost of treason is counted not in coin but in sons." For the first time, a ghost passed over Jaime's handsome face. Not fear, but the memory of once being able to be surprised. "This is madness," Cersei said, beautiful and feral. "You cannot expect me to submit to." Jon saw the motion happen, the small jerk in Joffrey's shoulder, the flash of metal not fully drawn. The boy thought a moment of blade would solve a web of years. He did not understand that steel solves only certain problems, and never the smallest ones. Sandor's hand closed on the hilt before it cleared leather. The prince choked on air and fury. "Take them," Robert said, voice gone empty with exhaustion. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked older and somewhat relieved, as men look after a fever has broken and left them damp and hungry. They took them. Cersei did not struggle. She cultivated scorn instead. Jaime moved with the curious grace of a man who was not sure if he was walking into a room or out of one. The children were children. Myrcella's tears like pearls, Tommen's round face blotched with confusion. Joffrey a blade made useless by being in the wrong hand at the wrong time. When the room was less full, when only the council remained and the gold cloaks at their posts, Robert slumped. Jon stepped forward with water. He did not offer wine. Robert took it and drank and breathed in a shudder and then laughed, became almost the same man again in an instant. "Write to Dragonstone," he told Ned. "Call Stannis to court. I'll be damned if I let Renly take the wrong lesson from this." "Renly can bear hearing the right one," Renly said from the shadows, dry and young. "Littlefinger," Robert continued without looking at Peter Baelish, "you will find how to pay for it." "I always do," Littlefinger murmured, and his smile said he had already found a dozen ways to pay for a dozen things that would cancel each other out and line his pockets besides. "Varys," Robert said, "send word to the Rock that the Queen is treated with all courtesy due her rank, and that the King will receive Lord Tywin's counsel when Lord Tywin remembers who the King is." "I shall send a raven that bows as low as your mercy," Varys cooed. "Pycelle, stand near me and tell me I will live," Robert finished. "And for once be right. I will stand, I will tell you, and I am very often right," Pycelle puffed. "The cut is not fatal, your grace." "Good," Robert said. When the council drifted into tasks and whispers, when the hall emptied save for guards and their discipline, Robert looked at Jon. He did not smile. "You gave me water when I wanted wine." "Yes," Jon said. "Good," Robert said again. He tilted his head a fraction. "Whose boy are you?" Jon opened his mouth and then closed it on the first answer. He had never felt the question ache in him so acutely. "Yours today," he said only, and the word surprised him by being entirely true. Robert's laugh this time was a tired thing that liked itself. "Come, page. Come, boy. There's work left." The days that followed felt as if a river in spate had fallen into its proper channel at last. Raging, yes, but contained. The Red Keep, its red was more rust than blood now, took the shape of new routines. Cersei was confined in high rooms. Jaime stalked the yard, a caged elegance, keeping his brightness like a blade. The small council sprouted urgent tasks like mushrooms after rain. Ravens flew. Stannis Baratheon's terse reply came swift and clean as a sword stroke. He would come and the law would be upheld. Men muttered in corridors about Tywin. Gold changed hands in larger amounts than usual. The city watch held its breath, waiting to see which wind would fill its cloaks. Jon ran, in the honest way of pages, between rooms and errands. He learned the back stair that went from the kitchen to the tower where the cool air smelled of stone. He learned who to bribe, the laundry for better cloths, the steward in charge of stabling for oats for ghost that were not vermin-chewed, and who to avoid, a scribe who liked to backhand boys within reach. He learned, too, that men who wore daggers at their belts did not always think themselves safe. He made time, amid all the errands, to go to Tobo Mott's forge with Robert, because the king wanted to treat himself to the distraction he had always liked best. Iron made obedient. Mott's hammer song poured into the street like a temple's prayer. Inside, heat hugged faces and turned breath to labor. A boy worked the bellows, black hair sweat curled, blue eyes defiant in a way that did not know it was defiant. Robert looked at him as if struck by a mirror tilted unexpectedly. "Who's this?" Robert asked, carelessly, a carelessness that fooled no one. "A boy," Mott said carefully. He had learned the taste of the court's interest and did not like it. "A good boy, strong arms, clever fingers. Does he have a name?" "Gendry." Jon and Gendry looked at each other, two boys at the edge of men, measuring. Jon saw the difference between being born royal and being born the straight product of muscle and necessity. He saw the likeness, too, the cast of face, the bone and the stubbornness that in other settings makes kings and in this one makes apprentices who survive men like kings. He did not look at Robert, whose mouth had gone tight. "Good boy," Robert said gruffly. "Keep him at the furnace. Everyone needs something that won't lie to them." He took up a breastplate, admired its line, put it down. He left with a new dagger and the sense he'd purchased more pain than he'd carried in with him. That night Jon dreamed of wolves running in stone corridors that turned into trees. He woke to Ghost's breath against his hand and a knowledge, as sure as winters happen, that the city would try to make him something that was not a wolf and not a man. Something else entirely if he let it. He resolved not to let it. He trained in the yard at first light with Barristan when the old knight could be coaxed to amuse himself. There was a grace to the blade in his hand that made Jon's heart ache with a wanting that was not the wall and not the Winterfell yard, something new. Barristan spoke sparingly, corrected once, accepted much less than excellence but expected the desire for it. Jon found a rhythm there that soothed the parts of him burned raw by errands and whispers. The hound watched sometimes, scoffing softly. "He moves like a dancer," Sandor would say, almost fond. "He survived kings," Barristan would reply without looking up. "Dancing is prudent." Jon learned the Kingsguard's oaths from the cadence of their mornings. He learned that men who kept their vows lived in a loneliness that was sometimes their pride and sometimes their ruin. He wondered what oath to make himself when none had been made for him. Sansa moved through the court like a flower in a draft. She was beautiful without meaning to be, and men's eyes looked past her to what she could be used for. She did not look at Jon when others were looking. Arya ran the keep's edges and made friends with boys and with swords made of sticks. She looked at Jon all the time when she could, and when she couldn't, Ghost found her and laid his head under her hand so she would know that someone always did. The news from the west came in like rain clouds building. Tywin Lannister had called banners. Raventalk told of riders on the Golden Tooth, levies from Lannisport, quiet bribes in Old Town and across the Reach. Cersei did not rage. She waited, and Jon found that waiting could terrify more than acting. Jaime began to wear his armor longer, his hair pulled back severely from his face, the pretty young man failing into the bright professional cruelty that lay under him like iron under guilt. Robert drank less. He still drank because he was Robert, but the cup sat longer untouched by his hand. He called Jon boy less and Jon more often, which confused and pleased and frightened Jon in equal measure. He spoke sometimes of Lyanna without saying her name. "I was promised a life," he said once by the fire, eyes focused not on flame but on a girl's tomb far to the north. "And then I lived another one. Who do you blame for that? A ghost? Yourself." He laughed. "The gods." "I don't know," Jon said, simple truth. "When I'm angry, I pick the biggest thing I can't change and I blame that for a while. Then I go do something I can." Robert stared at him and then roared laughter until the servants near the door smiled without knowing why. Sometimes Ned would look at Jon as if he were trying to memorize him. They did not get the privacy the godswood had given them in Winterfell. King's Landing ate privacy and spat out rumor. But they spoke when they could, over a table, behind a pillar, with Ghost inserting himself into the conversation like a white silent word. Ned told Jon to read and gave him names to watch. Baelish, whose mouth said one thing and eyes measured every purse in the room. Varys, whose silks hid knives that were not of the typical sort. Pycelle, whom it was safer to treat as wise and slow than slow and wise. Janos Slynt, whose men would follow a heavier purse if it were dropped loudly. Renly, who wanted to be loved and would use love to rule if ever given it. Stannis, who would use law the way most men use steel and would not consider how much it hurts the hand that holds it. "What of the queen?" Jon asked. "Do not judge a lioness by the manners she uses at table," Ned said, memory souring his mouth. "She is what she must be. That does not mean you must let her be it." Jon did not think of the queen as someone whose mind he would ever understand, only as whether that would drown him if he did not keep track of it. He kept track, and he kept out of rooms where her shadow lay. When Stannis came to the city, he came like a storm hauled in by a chain. He went straight to the king, bowed with a stiffness that did not change, and then went to the queen's rooms and stood outside with his jaw set. He did not enter. He did not speak there. He turned and went to the small council chamber, where he began the work of building a wall from law and will. Renly flitted in and out. Littlefinger smiled at both. Varys wrapped both in silk without asking permission. And Tywin marched. "Let him march," Robert said. "We beat a better man than him." He was not the same Robert who had gone hunting. He was angrier and narrower and, to Jon's surprise, a slender fraction more patient. "If he wants war, he'll get war. But he won't get my city." He looked at Janos Slynt. "You and yours will hold your line. If any man whispers otherwise into your ears, you tell me his name and I will cut out his tongue and give it to a richer man." Janos bowed so deeply it was almost a loss of balance. Ned urged swift letters north and careful promises to the river lords. He spoke hot to Robert and cold to Stannis and measured to Renly, and he slept not at all. Jon ran some of those letters himself because the king trusted him to hold the king's seal, and that trust was a weight on a boy's neck that made him straighten it. In the yard one dusk, Jaime turned on Jon as if they were actors in a play and the cue had finally come. "Snow," he said lazily, leaning on a practiced sword. The light made his hair a metal thing. "Ser Jaime," Jon said, polite as ice. "Do you like this city?" Jaime asked, mouth corking. "Many men come here to be someone else." "I am frequently someone else," Jon said. "It doesn't take a city." Jaime laughed. "Your father's wit with your uncle's grimness." He circled. "Do you think yourself a hero, boy? You saved a boar and a king in one day. You found something like courage in a clearing with a prince. The songs will be very dull if you keep preventing the interesting deaths." "I don't want songs," Jon said. "No, Jaime just. You want a name. The thing about names is that their weight is very like a chain's. Be careful what you ask to be called." He lifted the practice blade and flicked it as if at a fly. "Come, page. Show me if you can learn to be more than your hungers." They sparred, and Jaime was kind with a cruelty that had purpose. He cuffed Jon's pride. He cut him small where he was sloppy. He praised not at all, and when the bout ended he shrugged, the armor whispering. "Better than most boys," he allowed. "Worse than you should want to be." "Thank you," Jon said dryly. Jaime's eyes warmed for a heartbeat. "If you're wise, you'll learn to be worse than you can be. It's how men survive cities." He turned and left as if he had done something generous and didn't care to admit it. In the months that forced themselves forward, with Tywin's banners moving like a tide and ravens making maps of the sky, the city learned a new way to breathe. Markets were strained. Barges were stopped and then allowed. The Red Keep grew its garrison like a hedge grown to deter wolves. People spoke of war as if it were weather inevitable and then went about buying onions. Through it all, Jon was the hinge on which a few doors swung. He ferried words that made enemies and friends. He kept his eyes open in rooms where men lied pleasantly. He made a friend of Gendry by standing in a doorway and listening and not presuming to instruct. He made a wary understanding with the Hound by not trying to make one. He earned 10 more words from Barristan than the old knight gave most men in a week. He saw Sansa look at him once with something like homesickness because he reminded her of a place where houses were stone and feelings were bearable. He saw Arya wound her way through the keep's ducts and descend on people like a bright knife with questions. He saw the Queen at a window, hair lit like a saint's in a story where the saint burns everyone else. He wrote to Robb and Robb wrote back. The words were a corridor between boys who had used to wrestle and now did not know what armor to wear to speak. Robb said Bran stirred sometimes and sometimes was as still as a lake in winter. He said Theon grinned too often and Catelyn saw all things but one. He said the North could be held. Jon sent back words about the South that could not be held. He did not say he missed the shape of their arguments. He sent a small strand of ghost's hair in a parcel to Arya because she had asked, and she sent back a feather and a message. "I will be someone." And Daenerys across the sea grew into her own fire, but the city did not know how to listen to that wind yet. There were whispers of dragons and dreams, the kind any city leans over its own water to hear and then laughs at. Robert half lifted a hand to send a man to kill a girl he had never met, then put the hand down again because Jon had said a thing in a cold room and the thing had landed on him like a small, honest hand. "She never chose her father," Jon said when the talk turned to sending knives across water. "Neither did we." Robert had stared at him, mouth twisting, and then said nothing and walked to the practice yard and beat a man half his age with a blunted spear until his anger turned into breathlessness and the need for a drink. He did not sign the order. It was a small mercy. The world does not turn on many such mercies, but it can turn on one. When war finally came closer than Ravenflight, when Tywin's outriders probed too far east and the Riverlands began to smoke and men with coin talked quickly in inns with shutters closed, Ned put on his armor like a man puts on his first voice. He went to the king and said the North would answer if called. He went to the council and said the law would be the wall they put their backs to. Stannis nodded because the law was stiff enough to be a wall and unkind enough to keep friends off it. Renly smiled and made a show of arranging bread for the poor and men for the watch and friends for himself. Littlefinger asked very mildly whether the crown would like to sell its shadow to pay for torches. Varys breathed apologies and information in equal measure. Robert looked at his page and found in the boy's face a thing he could stand to believe in for an hour at a time. "Do you think we will win?" he asked Jon, stopping on a balcony where the wind brought the smell of the Blackwater. The river moved like a thought no one could finish. "I think the right men might keep their feet," Jon said. He had learned to love answers that were true and inadequate, and that you might be one of them if you drink water. Robert snorted. "Upstart." He leaned on the railing, hand flat to iron. "When I was young, there was no question of winning. There was only how hard we struck. Now there are questions. I hate them. I hate that the answers are never blows." "Some are," Jon said. He looked down at the yard where Jaime sparred with 3 men at once, almost bored. He looked up at the tower where Cersei was caged and untamed. He thought of Ned's quiet, of Stannis' stark line, of Renly's easy laughter. He thought of Arya running. He thought of Gendry pounding iron into patience. He thought of himself, a boy with a wolf in a place that had forgotten the smell of snow. You could strike some answers still. What would you strike? Robert asked, almost amused. The things that make you less than you are, Jon said. And if that was presumption, he offered it because he had learned this. Men who have lived inside their own legends need occasionally to hear they can be more than that. Robert did something he did not do often. He listened. He poured wine and did not drink. He watched the cup and set it down. Barristan says he will take you as a squire when you are old enough to be insulted by the word page, he said, almost offhand. He says you learn like fire takes to oil. Jon's breath hitched in his chest before he could have prevented it. The idea seemed like something someone else had earned and left behind by mistake. Ser Barristan. He is an old fool, Robert said, but he knows swords, and he knows boys who will make men who these halls need. Jon thought of the Night's Watch for a long moment. He thought of the emptiness the wall had filled in his imagining, the absolution of it, the clean, cold vow that would silence questions about houses and bastards and names. He thought of another vow entirely, one that would hang on him like a white cloak, heavy and cutting off as much as it gave. Then he thought of a third thing, not a vow but a way of standing in a world that asked him daily to be half of himself. I will squire for him, Jon said, and he felt the road in that answer lengthen in front of him in a way that made him both afraid and glad. Robert nodded, and for a moment his face was not a king's face nor a man's face. It was something else, an expression like a boy's when he finally decides to stop trying to lift a weight alone and let someone put a hand under it for a count of 3. Good, he said. We will make a man the songs will know and a king who will annoy them by not dying in a tragic manner. He pushed himself away from the railing and winced because the wound still pulled. Now go find me a meal that tastes like the north and a woman who laughs like the south. The gods might still forgive me if I reform slowly. The days that followed threw up their peculiar crises. Boats seized, a lord sullen, a market suddenly short of onions. War was a horizon line that would not decide to come closer or stay where it was. Jon lived in that stretched place where boys become men as if pulled through a small hole. He was in the yard watching Barristan drill a knot of knights when Varys appeared at his elbow like a thought one does not remember thinking. Such industry, Varys murmured, admiring the line of a parry as if it were a well-kept garden. I'm running, Jon said. It's what pages do. Oh, many men run, Varys said sympathetically. Few are running toward anything they have chosen. Jon did not answer at first, treating the eunuch as he had been taught to treat men who spoke in soft voices about hard things, like whether that might turn. Do you need me to carry a letter? He asked finally. Always, Varys said, eyes sharp now. But I have better messengers for my words. You are better suited to carrying others. How curious that is. He tilted his head. You have made an enemy of the queen. I had little choice. There's always a choice, Varys said dreamily. You'll learn which ones you can live with. He smiled. Be careful, Jon Snow. There are many games in this city. It is a credit to you that you are currently playing only 3. 3. Jon raised an eyebrow. Name them. Varys ticked his fingers with a kind of glee. The king's game, the hand's game, and your own. And yours. Oh, Varys sighed. Mine is to keep the city from turning into a pyre large enough to warm the gods. We don't have the wood for it. He stepped away, turned back briefly. If you ever need to hide, go to the kitchens. No one looks for wolves near ovens. When the first scouts brought news of Lannister riders near the Mummers' Ford, Ned called the bannermen of kings landing together and measured their mettle with his eyes. Stannis argued for hard measures on soft men, Renly for soft measures on hard men, and in the end Robert did what he had always done best. He cut through talk with a simple order. We ride at dawn, he said. We will not let the lion take our teeth from us at our own gate. He rode not with heavy pomp, but with a corps of men whose names would not all be remembered. Barristan in white, the hound in his sorrow, Ned in his winter. Jon rode with the baggage because pages ride where men tell them, but Ghost ran alongside the king's horse until Robert swore and laughed and swore again. The prince was not allowed to ride. Joffrey raged until he choked. Cersei watched from a high window and did not wave. They rode into a morning that tasted of iron and grass. The Blackwater caught the sun like a net. The city fell behind like a rumor you don't trust and cannot help repeating. At the ford, the lion's paw prints showed in the mud. The skirmish was short and ugly and measured in breaths and curses, the kind of thing war produces endlessly to make heroes tired. Jon held horses and heard the clatter and the screams and did not throw up because men he respected would see. Ghost's fur lay flat. His eyes were all pupil. When it was over, they'd beaten back a Lannister feeler, killed men who were someone's brothers, and learned that the army in the west did not intend to stop short of the city. Robert took stock of this news like a man taking stock of a harvest that would not be enough. He did not despair. He did not pretend. "Send the ravens," he told Ned. "Call all the friends we grew 8 years ago and the friends we thought too frail to bring in from the cold. We will feed this city through a siege if we must, and we will strike when the lion sleeps. We have done hard things, Ned. We will do them again." They did. They fed the city by measures of barley and lies and hope. They struck not with bright banners but with knives at night, with raids across fords, with sudden rides that made the lion wait to raise his full paw. The realm shuddered and held. Tywin tested and waited because his impatience was legendary and his patience more so. Between such heavy things, life persisted. Jon learned to lay out the king's armor in the order Robert wanted it when his hands were shaking. He learned that Ghost disliked Stannis on sight and that Stannis disliked Ghost right back. He learned that if he went to the kitchens, he could talk to a little girl selling mussels and clams who thought Ghost was a spirit that would grant wishes if you touched his ear. He learned that Gendry could smile when the iron was good and that he could not when it was poor. He learned the queen had a way of making sweetness taste like wine gone to vinegar. He learned, in the deep place that decides what sort of man a boy will be, that being given an oar in the boat of a great man does not make you a slave nor a master. It makes you a rower, and you must decide how hard you pull and when to refuse. Once, late, he found Renly in a garden with a knight in a green cloak. They stood close enough that the air between them seemed to have shape. Renly smiled at Jon easily. The Green Knight, Loras Tyrell, looked at Jon and then away, as if weighing whether his hidden heart would allow him to see bastards as part of the world. Later, in the yard, Loras and the Hound rode at rings, and Loras won, and Sandor laughed and told him he'd been lucky. The laughter sounded like a man's pleasure in not having to be what he was, just for a breath. None of this altered the serious business of the realm, and all of it made it bearable. When Stannis finally came to the king with a plan to force Tywin to choose between his children and his pride by marching hard on the Lannisport stores, Robert listened and nodded and accepted pain in advance.
Ned say,
Counseled caution, and Robert laughed because that is what he did when men told him to be careful and he decided to be brave. He sent Stannis west with good men, and Renly south to the Stormlands to shore up the coast, and himself he kept in the city because he knew that a king in a siege is a symbol that buys hours. Jon did not see all the battles. He did not need to. He heard enough to make pictures in his mind. Men slogging in mud with banners too heavy to lift, horses screaming when spears found them, the sudden silence that follows a rout as if the world holds its breath while it decides if there will be a massacre. He learned that victory tasted like iron and had the same long aftertaste as fear. He learned that letters from the north could be the brightest part of a week. Robb wrote of snow like feathers and of Bran's hand twitching faster months after it had twitched not at all. He wrote of a raven that came in with ice on its wings and of a feast that made the hall warm again. He did not write of Catelyn's eyes. Jon wrote back of heat like a wet cloak and of a king who was trying to be something he had never trained to be. And one night, months into a war that had not yet declared itself fully, Jon woke and went out into a courtyard because Ghost had stood, suddenly, and put his nose into Jon's hand with urgency. The courtyard looked up at a sky with a single hard star. He found Ned Stark there, sitting as if waiting for a passerby he wasn't sure would come. "You're awake," Ned said. "Ghost doesn't sleep," Jon replied, and then felt embarrassed at the childishness of the line. He waited for Ned to ask him something impossible. Ned did not. "Robert is not the boy I followed," Ned said. "None of us are the boys we were. That's truth. But there's another truth worth keeping beside it. Sometimes the men we've become can make a choice that the boys never could." He looked at Jon with a careful face. "You made one, at the hunt, and in the clearing, and in a dozen small moments when no one was looking." Jon swallowed something that was not pride and not sorrow. They felt like smaller choices than that. "They always do," Ned said. They sat together without talking for a time that felt like when you have reached the second circle of a storm, the strange peace inside a violence that has not ended. Eventually Ned stood and put a hand on Jon's shoulder. It was awkward, as if touching boys had not been taught in a Stark school. "Go sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will require you." Tomorrow always did. When people later sang about that year, they sang about battles and betrayals and a king who did not die when he had been meant to, and some of them sang about a boy with a white wolf who ran errands that became history. They did not sing about the morning Jon took bread to the queen's rooms and saw Myrcella sitting very straight on a stool, braids perfect, eyes red, and the queen standing at the window like a statue of herself. They did not sing about how Jon put the bread down and did not bow, and how Cersei looked at him like a puzzle whose missing piece she resented, and how he left thinking, "I do not know what I have taken from you, but I know I have taken it." They did not sing about the time Gendry came to the yard with a helm he had made for himself in the shape of a bull, and Jon laughed for the first time that week and said, "It suits you." And Gendry said, "It's heavy." And Jon said, "You're strong." And Gendry said, "I," as if he had only just noticed. They did not sing about Sansa and Arya arguing over a song in a corridor until Arya snatched the note and flung it and Sansa cried and Jon picked it up and held it out to Sansa and said nothing. They did not sing about how Arya came to him that night and said, "I miss the wood." And he said, "So do I." And Ghost put his head in their laps until the missing became part of breathing. They sang, sometimes, about how Robert did not send a knife across the narrow sea and how a girl with silver hair lit a funeral pyre that did not behave like a funeral pyre should. They sang about dragons in night skies above a place that had not seen dragons in 100 years and a city where wolves learned to walk on marble. Mostly they sang about what men always sing about, the way swords look when the sun hits them. Years later, when Jon would remember the first autumn he spent as the king's page, he would not begin with the throne room or the hunt, not even with the fall from the tower. He would begin with a morning after rain when the stones of the Red Keep held the damp like a secret, and he ran down 3 flights of stairs with a clean shirt over his arm and turned a corner and nearly collided with Barristan Selmy. "Sire," Jon said, struggling to hold shirt and dignity. "Come," Barristan said without preface, and led him into a small, bare room where 2 swords lay on a trestle. "You are quick to learn. You must also learn to forget what you know." Jon blinked. "Sir." "The way you move," Barristan said coolly, "is Winterfell and necessity. Good. But if you are to be my squire, you must be 2 men in one body. The one who fights like a wolf and the one who fights like a man who has taken vows he cannot keep and will try to anyway." Jon stared at the old man and saw, suddenly, the shape of a future that was not a wall and not a hall but a room where he would stand alone with his oaths and decide not to break even though breaking would be easier. Scared him more than battle. Felt more like honor than any speech he'd ever heard. "I will try," Jon said, and Barristan gave him the ghost of a smile. They took up the blunted blades and moved until the world narrowed to breadth and angle and the way a man's foot decides what the rest of him will do. At noon, Robert sent for him. Jon came with a towel and found the king sitting with Stannis and Renly and Ned and a map spread between them like skin. "Boy," Robert said without looking up, "tell me what you know about the nights when men do not sleep because of lies." "They are like other nights," Jon said, surprising himself by not trying to be careful. "Only longer." Robert grunted a laugh. "We are going to make this city deserve the songs it forces men to write about it," he said. "Or we are going to make it so fearsome the singers go hoarse and shut up." "Both," Stannis said. "Neither," Renly suggested. "Enough," Ned said. Jon stood with the towel and felt, suddenly and fiercely, that he was exactly where he should be, in the service of men who were wrong and right and old and young and trying on their various ways to keep the world from bleeding too much. He thought of Ghost, of the smell of snow that lived inside the wolf's fur no matter how hot the day was, and he thought of Winterfell like a word you carry and do not say, and of a girl across the sea who had stepped into a fire as if it were a door. He did not know how the story would end. He had learned to stop needing that knowledge. He knew only this. On a day in the yard at Winterfell, a king had pointed at him and said, "I'll take him," and the world had turned just enough to make a different pattern of light on the stones. He would be responsible for how he walked in that light. When the war finally came as men mean it, siege lines dug into the earth like writing, engines built, a river sown with floating fire, Jon found himself on a wall with a white wolf and a borrowed bow, because everyone in a city under siege uses every hand. He watched men drift downriver half on fire and thought, I might be them. He watched the king on the battlements shouting a song that made brave men braver and fools foolhardy. He watched Stannis tally the grain and Renly tally the smiles and Ned gather a handful of men to ride where the line had buckled and pull it straight again with their bodies. He did not break. Ghost did not break. The city did not break that day. After, in the kitchens, Varys' refuge, Jon shared a bowl of stew with a girl who sold mussels and told her a lie about how the battle had been easy because sometimes children need lies as much as men need wine. He stood and found Gendry by the door, soot on his cheek, helm under his arm. "You look stupid in that," Jon said, and Gendry grinned. "You look like a dog," Gendry replied, and Ghost wagged his tail as if to agree. They went up into the cooler air together and stood looking down at the river, which had gone back to gliding as if war were none of its business. The city glowed the way cities glow after they have not died when they might have. "You'll be a knight," Gendry said, squinting into the sun. "I'll be something that tries," Jon said. "Same thing," Gendry said, and snorted when Jon elbowed him. A raven came with news from the west. Tywin withdrawing, not beaten entirely but recalculating. His lines drawn shorter, the game reset. Another raven came with news from Dragonstone. Stannis' stores held. Another with news from the north. Bran opened his eyes, looked at the ceiling, and said a word no one would tell in a letter. Jon walked to Ned Solar with the letter in his hand. He did not knock. He entered as a son would, and Ned raised his eyes and saw the truth written on Jon's face before he read it. "Bran?" he asked. "Bran," Jon said, and for a moment they were not hand and page, king's man and lord's bastard. They were 2 points on a line of family winter-hardened, relieved. That night the king threw a feast because he felt like a man who had been spared twice in one life and was shocked to be grateful. The hall roared. Wine did its work and failed in its other work because Robert stopped before it could ruin him. Sansa sang a song that was too sad for a feast and made men quiet. Arya laughed too loud at a joke Sandor made and did not apologize. Stannis left early. Renly stayed late. Jaime played at being a man among men and then went to his sister's door and turned away. Jon stood by a pillar as he had at Winterfell and watched the world move and did not flinch from being part of it. When Robert called his name and held up a cup, Jon went. When Barristan beckoned early the next morning with a new drill to bruise his shins and his pride, Jon went. When Ned handed him a letter with Robb's tight script, Jon took it and read it in a stairwell with Ghost pressed warm to his side. Winter would come. It always did. The wall would still stand. The North would still wait with its long patience for men to remember that songs are not shields. Across the sea, a girl would step into her dragons as if into a story and become a person who would one day change the sky. But for a season in King's Landing, a king lived because a boy poured water instead of wine, and a queen learned that sometimes even a lioness can be caged, and a bastard found that he could be the quiet thing that set a wheel on a different rut. He would spend years living in the consequences of that quiet. The morning a stag crossed the road outside the city, thin and surprised to find itself there. Robert went out after it with a smile, and Jon followed because that had become the shape of his days. They did not always catch what they chased. They learned to take the running as its own prize. And in the running, in the errands and the yards and the rooms where maps were spread like unhealed wounds, Jon learned what his father had meant in the godswood, that the ocean doesn't ask a net for permission. It takes what it takes and gives what it gives. A boy could drown in it, or he could learn to stay on his feet. He could even, if he were foolish and lucky and stubborn enough, teach a king to stop stepping into the waves with his eyes shut. He learned to be foolish and lucky and stubborn. The rest would come. The rest would be winter and dragons and walls and the long night of men's foolishness. But for now, for this one long breath of a season, he was the king's page, and the king lived, and the city held, and Ghost's white head lay on his knee, and Jon could feel the great beast of the world turning under him and knew he had stepped in time.